the meat and potatoes of reading for me. There's a lot of Nazi involvement in US politics, if you were not aware. I was not aware. I really felt like I was reading a book, you know, like I did not get absorbed in the story ever. Good morning, friends. I don't know if you can tell, but I just woke up. Hopefully the sun will wake me up, as well as my coffee. It is now July, so it is time for my June wrap up. I did read a couple of really good ones this month. If you saw in I think it was my last video, I was reading to distract myself from losing my job. I got laid off at the beginning of the month. It's fine. I already have something else lined up, but it's been an emotional month. I still managed to read 5 books, even though my concentration really took kind of a nosedive. And I do have 2 in particular, actually more like 3, I guess, that I'm really excited to talk to you about because they really came through for me. They were sufficiently distracting. First up was the best one of the month, and it's literally only, how long was this? 105 pages, and that is Eva Baltazar's Boulder. I've honestly never seen a bad review of this. I've seen lots of people talk about it here on BookTube. Loved this. It's kind of like a queer character study. So yes, a queer character study of the titular main character, Boulder. That's the only name that we get from her. It's like her nickname, and it's kind of supposed to be representative of her emotions, I guess, her lack of emotion. And then her partner, Samsa, they immediately fall for each other. Boulder is the type who, she kind of wants to separate herself from the world. She wants to just work on a ship, kind of away from society, and she's the cook, the chef on the ship. So they are opposites in every way, but it kind of works for them. And then like 5 years go by in just a couple dozen pages, and it's very much told in kind of a summarizey, no dialogue kind of writing style, which typically I don't always love, but I feel like it really did work with this one. So Samsa breaks the news to Boulder that she wants to have a baby via IVF, and like every fiber of Boulder's being does not want this, but she doesn't say anything. And so that's kind of one of the themes that comes up at the book, is like communication, or like lack of communication, and the sort of the fallout from that. It's like the beginning of the conflict. So over the course of 8 years, we watch their relationship unfold, and it's really fantastically written. The story itself I feel like is not gonna sound like anything to write home about, but the writing is just so good. I ended up reading it in about 2 sittings. And it was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize in 2023, and I can see why. I feel like it actually should have won. It was really good. I love when like nature metaphors come into play, especially when it has to do with like the female body. A lot of times I feel like writers will try to use metaphor for the female body, but they end up kind of objectifying the body. And in this case, I feel like with nature, it just doesn't feel the same way to me. It doesn't feel like it's being objectified. Yeah, there's just some really beautiful lines in here. I'll try to flip through and put some on the screen for you. And we do get a really satisfying, kind of bittersweet ending. The characters do feel very real, I will say that. Like, it really does feel like you're almost reading just a little snippet out of somebody's diary or something. The whole thing went by in a blur, and I would love any recommendations that are similar to this really short little character study, really beautifully written literary fiction. This is like the meat and potatoes of reading for me, if that makes any sense. So I highly recommend Boulder. Loved it. And then this month's nonfiction was a beast of a book, and I did listen partly to the audio to help me out with this one, and this was The Devil's Chessboard, Alan Dulles, the CIA, and the Rise of America's Secret Government. If you guys have been watching me for a couple of months now, you know you've seen some of these types of books kind of peppered in, some of these like nonfiction, kind of CIA, secret government program type of books. I've been reading roughly like 1 a month, I would say. For most of my life, I've been that person who kind of stayed out of politics. It just was never something that interested me as a kid or as a teenager, but as I've gotten older, you start learning about the CIA and all of these conspiracy theories, and then some of them are proven true, and you start reading about like false flag events, and you start questioning the narrative that we're told in school, the things that we're taught in school, and you realize like things don't make sense or things don't line up, and you're like, okay, there's got to be something more going on here. It for sure has a lot of names. It goes a little bit slow. Like I said, I partially listened to the audiobook to help me through, but basically David Talbot chronicles the US's rise to power and the CIA's creation under the, I think it was, which administration? I have it in here somewhere. We'll get to it. But he puts a specific focus on how Allen Dulles, who was the longest serving director of the CIA, that's obviously JFK, he kind of chronicles his rise to power and his abuse of power is probably a better word for it. Dulles started out working on Wall Street, but then eventually obviously ended up in politics. And he didn't start the CIA, but he, like I said, rose to be the director of it, and he served under several presidents. He was the type of guy who would, once he got into that position, he would boast about the fact that he had the power to send people to their deaths. Like, that's the type of guy that he was. There were lots of interviews in here from people, including his own children, who would say how cold and calculated he was. And so the author does a really deep dive into Dulles's involvement in the Warren Commission, and how his sole priority was to steer the investigation into JFK's murder towards the sort of Lee Harvey Oswald lone gunman kind of theory, even though we have photographic and video evidence that there were two shooters and JFK was shot from the front and from behind. So clearly he was involved in some sort of cover-up there. He essentially kept a lot of the CIA's actual missions and what they were actually doing kind of under wraps, and kept them secret from the president. This was beginning with Truman. I knew it was in here somewhere. Dulles would, without the president's knowing, whoever he was serving under at the time, he literally recruited like some ex-Nazis for missions, which will be no surprise to anyone who's read Operation Paperclip. I read that either last month or the month before, and that outlines Nazi involvement in NASA. So there's a lot of Nazi involvement in US politics, if you were not aware. I was not aware. So when the Eisenhower presidency eventually comes along, by this point Dulles has a lot of loyal followers, and he's enmeshed them in the White House, in the Pentagon, in the State Department, and they're all very loyal to him and basically doing his bidding. The whole reason why this gets out of hand is because the CIA is not really being monitored by Congress. And then when the JFK presidency comes and JFK realizes that the CIA has an alliance with the mafia, because they did at the time, like late 50s, early 60s, JFK is quoted as saying he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. Kennedy was also very anti-war. He hated war. He said all war is stupid. You know, we know that war makes the elites very rich and people love their money. One insane fact, I'm just gonna kind of give you a couple of bullet points for like things to interest you and why you should read it, even if this doesn't sound like something you'd be interested in, is that Lee Harvey Oswald was trained by the CIA. He was not just a random dude. None of these guys who try to assassinate presidents are ever just random dudes. And some theorists have suggested that he was the perfect scapegoat for an assassination. You know, we know programs like MK Ultra existed in the 60s, and so it's very possible that Oswald was drugged and like doesn't remember doing it. Like, that is 100% a thing that could have happened. So even though the book is highly focused on, you know, the middle of the century, you can absolutely extrapolate some of this information into the present day, and I just imagine how like far and wide the arms of the CIA reach now. And it's genuinely terrifying. I feel like I literally just saw an ad for their master class the other day, and it makes, you know, their public image is like, you know, they want to make themselves seem like supposed to like conjure images of like James Bond and like these secret missions, but really, like, as crazy as it sounds, like they really are like a shadow government that's actually running the show. You know, the American public, I feel like, may never truly know the full extent of their power. Just one of the reasons why you should read it. Yes, it's long, it's a chunky book, you could call it a door stopper, I would say. I do recommend it though. I mean, proceed with a little bit of caution, you know, but I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Okay, now moving on to the good that really helped me during my week of being laid off. This I think was the one that I was actually reading during that week, or I picked it up like a couple days after. Ira Levin's This Perfect Day. Look at this sick, like, vintage cover. So if you don't know, Ira Levin wrote The Stepford Wives, he wrote Rosemary's Baby, so that's kind of more of what he's famous for. The reason why I thrifted this one years ago, I don't even really remember thrifting it, was because it references 1984 on the back. It says it outshines Orwell's 1984. It doesn't, but it was still very good. You can see I've got a decent amount of little tabbies in there. So this one reminded me a lot of like The Giver, also 1984, like it for sure has some similarities between all those things. It is a dystopian novel and it is set in a future where basically the human race has achieved world peace, but only because we get an injection once a month that basically just like turns our emotions off. And makes us docile little worker bees. And so that is how society and the world has achieved world peace. But there's no creativity anymore, no free thinking. What was actually the craziest thing about this is that there's these big, like, he doesn't call them this, but they're basically like big supercomputers. Those computers kind of make the decisions for everybody and for society. And even though he doesn't use the word artificial intelligence, he doesn't use any terms like AI, he really was ahead of his time, I feel like, with this, because that is exactly what a lot of people do now. They use AI to make decisions. They don't necessarily rely solely on their intuition or their experience. They just will Google something and be like, hey, what would you do? Or this is my situation, what's the best option? And so that was pretty crazy to be able to, because I mean, this was written in like 1970. So to be able to still see some truth to it in 2025 is like pretty insane. So one day our main guy, Chip is his name, he finds himself wishing that he could make decisions, for himself about his life. It's very much like Julia in 1984 passing Winston the note, where she kind of lets him know like, hey, I know that you're different. I know that you're kind of a free thinker. And so Chip gets passed a note by a young woman. I forget her name. I think I forgot to put it in my notes. It's like, she has a name like a flower, like lavender or something like that. So anyway, the note basically says, I'm like you, there's a secret group of us. And when he goes to meet them, he is kind of confronted with this idea for the first time that their whole society is kind of BS. Like, yeah, world peace is a good thing, but not if everybody's living like robots, because like, what's the point of life? Basically, around every turn, Chip really finds out that reality is like not what he thought it was, and that's what kept me turning pages and kept me sufficiently distracted during my week of being laid off. Unfortunately, the writing really isn't anything crazy special, but when the plot and the pacing moves really fast, I'm totally fine with that, as long as I'm not in like a super literary mood. And I clearly wasn't, because I was very distracted from everything going on. So I was left feeling very impressed by how innovative and forward-thinking his ideas were. I mean, 1970, that was before even the personal computer. So I was just very impressed with how similar his reality was to ours. And I feel like, I'm the type of person who believes like AI, it's obviously already kind of infecting every pocket of life that it possibly can. And so anyway, this was very chillingly ahead of its time, and I do recommend This Perfect Day. Quickly, I did want to mention one. This is now the okay category. This was an essay collection by Barbara Kingsolver. I have read her once before. I read a novel by her, but it wasn't super memorable. And I think she maybe just isn't for me. I don't know. This is High Tide in Tucson. Came out in 1995. This was one that I thrifted, I think, when I was in New Mexico. And I was clearing out my bookshelves the other day, and I had it actually in the donation pile. And then I started reading a couple pages, and I was like, well, let me just read it real quick before, I get rid of it. I don't have a ton of little tabs in there. She covers a wide range of topics. So she's talking about motherhood a lot, family values, traveling, and just like general life observations as a writer. It was very well written. So for sure, if you crave like that good writing, she will do that for you. But ultimately, I felt like this one was kind of skippable compared to some of the other really good essay collections that I've read. And I found the topics to be kind of like random. There wasn't a lot of like similarities or cohesion kind of stringing them together. Not that there needs to be, but it was just something that I noticed. Like, I enjoyed her observations and I enjoyed it while I was reading it, but then it's one of those books that you, when it's over, you just kind of have this overall sense of sort of being underwhelmed. Some standouts were Confessions of a Rock Goddess, in which she regales us with the story of joining an all-author band, one author of whom was Stephen King. So that was really an interesting story. That one was like the most fun because her perspective of the experience, being quite shy, was like funny in retrospect. Also, Stone Soup was a really good one. She dissects the nuclear family, what it is, how it came to be, what it means, the fallout from that kind of shift in a society, and it was really great kind of food for thought for anyone who's interested in like domesticity and societal expectations and relationships and all of that. I did think it was really interesting. Overall, not one that I'm gonna recommend anybody just like run to the bookstore and go get. You know, if like me, you've heard her name for years and you're just like, you wanted to pick something up just to kind of see, you know, to sort of start somewhere with her and see what she's all about, I feel like this is an okay place to start. And then, OMG, this is my rant book, and I'm so sad because it's by an author that I love, Olivie Blake. She wrote the Atlas Six trilogy, which doesn't get, you know, the most stellar reviews. A lot of times people really don't like these for their sort of lack of plot, but she does character really well. And so this is Alone with You in the Ether. This one is supposed to be a romance with like a touch of time travel or something to do with time. That's all the back says. I'll put the blurb here so you can pause for a second. There's this sort of kind of subtle promise in the blurb that we're gonna get something that has to do with time. So I was like, okay, it's not gonna be just like your typical romance. It just fell so flat. The characters were not likable or interesting. She generally writes character really well, and dialogue really well, so I was very surprised that some of the dialogue was really cringy. She does this like self-insert thing as the author, like she'll insert herself and it'll literally say narrator, and then she'll like comment something weird like, this is foreshadowing. Like she's just telling us, the reader, that she just wrote foreshadowing, and I feel like it's an insult to me as the reader that you have to insert yourself as the author and tell me that you just wrote foreshadowing instead of me figuring it out on my own. It's weird. A lot of people struggle to get into her writing style because of this. Another thing that she'll do is, I feel like she's that author who writes with like a thesaurus right next to her, because she'll, instead of just saying like, oh, he suggested this, or he said this, she'll say like, he postulated this, but it's always like a word that's like the most extreme like verb or adverb that she could have possibly chosen, and it's a little bit distracting. So I really felt like I was reading a book, you know, like I did not get absorbed in the story ever. Also, she tries to do this sort of multiverse thing with like these different timelines, which was kind of the entire premise for the Atlas Complex, and she does it fairly well in the Atlas Complex because there is a character who is fully recognizably in their own separate timeline from all the other characters. But this was so confusing. There was no clarity on when we were or like where we were. That was something that I was seeing in a lot of the lower star reviews, which I'm gonna pop on the screen. There are some really hilarious ones that I just feel like need to be shared with you. She didn't really fully know how she wanted to include the time element. She just knew she wanted to have one. And so she kind of tried to shove it in there, but it didn't make any sense. And I love a flawed character, don't get me wrong, but Reagan is our main girl, and she is openly manipulative. Like, she just straight up says like, oh yeah, men are like easy to manipulate, all they want is sex. Like, I didn't like her at all. She's actively cheating on a guy named Mark with our male main character, Aldo. Like, Mark is in there like almost the whole time, at least the first half, and they're actively together, but Reagan and Aldo are like doing the thing where they meet and they're dating and they're having conversations, all the while Reagan is still with Mark. It was just weird. And then Aldo is supposed to be this math genius who's obsessed with bees, and we get these very subtle hints that he's maybe autistic or neurodivergent for sure. And he's also kind of a doormat. He literally says at one point in time, like,
I'll just be here, you know, as long as you'll have me.
He just feels a little bit like a simp. I don't know. I was not rooting for them. I didn't care if they ended up together. There were no stakes. The entire premise, I feel like, is just based on the author's fascination with this idea that every decision we make opens up a possible different reality. You know, if you love a romance and decent writing, maybe you'll like this one. So yes, that was all 5 that I read in June. There's my little stack. And then I do have I have some things coming up in July that I'm very excited for. Some more Reading Around the World challenge books. So if you stick around, then you'll find out. So I will see you in my next video. Bye guys.